Hello, welcome to Osquery office hours. Here we are, late December. Year's wrapping up, and we're getting ready for another release. Anyhow, first section is announcements, highlights, anything people want to call out. No one wrote anything down. I'm assuming it's a quiet month, so probably not. Oh, wait, someone's writing something down.
Yeah.
I have an agenda item for that.
Okay.
Anyhow, I guess if people don't know, we released Osquery 5.1.0, and it's been in pre-release beta for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. So we can talk about that down in agenda land. Issues, PRs, anything people want to talk out? Sounds like a general shout out and thanks to Alexander, if I'm pronouncing that
wanted
right.
to thank, I don't know how to spell your name, sorry, Alexander, for the excellent work with the Windows firewall table. It's really good. And I would like to show this as an example on how future pull requests should be handled how the code should be written for the next Windows pull request.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. It was quite an interesting adventure because this one was quite a departure from the other tables implementation. So it was interesting.
I'm glad to hear that you're super happy with that, and thanks, Alexander, for doing that. Alessandro, can you say more about what about this was excellent, and what is the pattern that we hope to see repeated?
The code is well written. We have all the guidelines perfectly followed in this pull request. And what sometimes happens that people use tables that have been there for a while, at least on Windows, and the code there is not really following the newer standards that we have. And so we sometimes have problems with the interfaces or types not really well defined, magic numbers instead of very well defined constants, and so on and so forth.
Got it. Okay, so I'm hearing that it maps well to the guidelines which we have published, and some of the old tables have not been updated to those guidelines. So the idea is just point someone towards this as an example of following the guidelines effectively. Yep. Cool. Do we still have documentation that's how to write a table? I remember there used to be a page like that.
If we don't, I was actually going to propose to put it somewhere. Maybe I don't know if it is if it should live in the wiki or in the pull request template. But the goal is to have a single place where we showcase the best that we have, so that people
creating new tables in the OS on the wiki.
I think it would be entirely reasonable to have the pull request template reference that, but at the point in time someone is opening a pull request, they hopefully have already read whatever they were going to read.
So it seems like making sure that page is consistent with all of the expectations that we have, and then maybe trying to put sort of front and center there. Here's an example of a PR that followed that process well. So please take a look at that.
So I think that there are two things, and I want to call them out because I don't want to blur them together. So there's sort of a PR process, which I don't review Windows code real well, so I'm not paying much attention. But it sounds like there's been some good back and forth in the PRs. That seems positive. But there's also just I really like the idea of having reference table implementations, for sort of oh, you want to write a table? It's probably going to be call an API, manipulate the data, and put it somewhere. Here's a great example. Copy this one, right? So I wouldn't link to the PR. I would just link to the table code.
Fair. That sounds fine to me. I noticed at the bottom of this page, it says the last thing it says, when in doubt, use existing open source tables to guide your development. And it's like, maybe the first thing it should say is like, when reading this guide, like take a look at this table as a good example of how to follow all these guidelines.
That's what I did initially. I just looked at the other tables, how they were done.
That's all I do.
It's all anyone does, really. And I think it's a great point, Alessandro, that making sure folks, when they do that, are looking at something that's got the patterns that we want. I mean, like a little bit of information up front could possibly pay a lot of dividends down the line.
Other things people want to talk about? Any PRs anyone wants to bring up? General community questions? Intent here is...
We have another pull request for the Windows updates that will help review. That's a really cool table to have.
That's also from Alexander, right?
Yeah, and I give priority to it next.
I glanced at it and it looks okay from where I sit, but I can't speak to the implementation side so well. If no one else has any things, we can sort of move on to agenda. So we released 5.10, roughly 2 weeks ago or something. I've pushed it out to the Collide beta fleet, which isn't that big, but it exists. I don't think we've seen any issues. Anyone else testing it?
I said I would, and we didn't. But I know Charvo did testing. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Charvo.
I haven't done BPF specific testing, but otherwise, things seem to work.
Do you know if any of the people with BPF problems have tried it?
Other than GitHub security, I'm not aware. Or rather, there was another company, I don't remember. So we had two parties testing out the release, and they said it was working fine.
Do we want to just call it stable? We'll push it out to the world?
Yeah, I think so. And we will also have another release anyway with Apple Silicon.
So it sounds like we think we should just push 5.10 stable.
Yeah.
I will need to review our process for doing so. I think that has to be I think that's a new build. I think code signing basically reruns or new code signs.
Yeah, I think once you create a release tag, you can input like 5.1.
Yeah. I just mean I think our process isn't just. I'll talk about it later. It's boring. I don't want to take time up. Okay, I will try and do at least one more sanity check of my beta fleet, and then I guess we can push it live. Because I don't know. Next up, the 5.2 release.
I actually forgot another shout out. Charville dedicated a lot of time this week to us, and we went over all the commits in the pull request to make sure that everything was working as intended. And we even found a bug that we fixed. So it was super helpful. Thank you, Charville.
I'm going to thank myself because I read that code too.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone helping out with the.
What's this thing about relaxing the CI requirements?
Yeah, so we have. So when we had Azure pipelines, Stefano did something more smarter than me, and he had an umbrella job that could work as the root job of the CI. When I redid the CI in GitHub Actions, I followed another route. And instead, if you open the settings in the repository, you will see that we have specific jobs in there. Now, the jobs that we are waiting for in the pull request are for macOS Catalina, I believe, which we never fire because we removed them. And so in order to merge this, we have to remove those two workers. And once it is merged, we can add the new ones that are for Big Sur. And we should probably fix this to have a root job that we can rely on. So we will not have this problem again in the future.
Can we change the workers before we merge it?
Can we change? I don't know. We can remove the jobs that are stalled because they are no longer configured. I don't know if we can already add the new ones inside the configuration of the repository.
So
they are already there, I think.
So my gut. So I don't think we have to be super fancy, right? Like at some point, if we turn CI off, merge this, and then turn CI on, CI is still going to run against master. So as long as we fix CI and it runs against master and everything is happy, then like if we have to turn it off because we're merging a giant thing that fundamentally changes the way our platform designation works, maybe better not to angst too much.
I agree. Totally fine with me, and thank you for explaining. I have no concerns there.
So we are currently Catalina, and we're moving to what?
We have Big Sur for the build process, but we also have a new worker.
I'm just writing it down. That's good enough.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see the notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can just disable this for now.
If there's
but we will
nothing
make an issue to fix it in the future.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to fix it real fast. But yeah, I guess if you make an issue, we'll stick it in the milestone because I think we can't release until CI is fixed. There is a question here about Windows firewall rules. Is that just we should get that into the release?
It is pretty self-contained. It's Windows only, doesn't touch core components. I think we should probably merge it.
I am totally in favor of merging that and the other tables from Alexander. People may or may not know I have these tables in Launcher, but I'm always psyched to see higher quality code in Osquery than some of the stuff I've got over in my little corner. So that's
Thank
super
you.
exciting.
Yeah, so the Windows update history is the other table.
Yeah, they're both super useful. I think the question maybe we need to understand is when do we need to cut this release by?
The 24. I'm just kidding.
I mean, whatever. If you want to release on the 24th, I'll cut you a release then. Mike, what's your date on this one?
At least pre-release by the holiday. I know that I'm trying to be reasonable.
Which holiday? There are two of them.
Well,
they're a week apart.
Before the general holiday downtime of 24th through the 31st, when I expect work to cease.
So by the end of the week, hopefully.
I mean,
yes.
I'm not going anywhere.
I'm going to be available on volunteer basis, but a lot of us are taking PTO. We just accrued. So I want it to happen, so I'll be available as needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because part of why I'm sort of harping a little bit on this is, if we actually think we want to cut a pre-release by the 24th, In many ways, there is no time left between now and then, because like most of my office goes on PTO tomorrow. So from a work scheduling perspective, most people are going to have the 23rd off. A lot of them are going to have the 22nd off. I'm around, so it's not that big a deal to me, but sort of be cognizant of that.
Yep.
I guess we can take a look at what else is in that milestone. Let's pull up that milestone now, actually. That will help us see if we're missing anything. Okay, so we're talking about 520. Boy, there's a lot of stuff here that we've just been sort of carrying along and we should get rid of.
Do you want to share screen temporarily?
No.
Tab?
There's too much stuff. I'll read it. It's like pointless. It's like all the baggage we've been carrying for a long time. Sure, you can have a link. Same link it always is. That one. I feel like what I need to do is go through and close out a whole bunch of these things. Hey, look, we have a ticket for making GitHub Action CI Runner Big Sur already. Astounding. Okay, so if I just go down this list, almost all of these are real things that we should be doing something about, but I don't
have a PR associated, especially towards the bottom of the list.
What, the PIE support? Stefano was saying he wanted to do that one differently. I don't know if he's had a chance to.
It's already. Well, I did it, so it's approved, so it can be merged actually.
Yeah. So you did that, and I approved it, and then you said you wanted to do it differently and didn't merge it.
But that's like months ago. But now I did change again. You approved it. Teddy approved it, and now it can be merged. I just didn't click the button, so that's fine.
Practically speaking, do you want to merge the M1 PR first?
Doesn't for that specific PR doesn't make any difference.
Okay, the M1 stuff touches so much.
But I would maybe go with that first.
Okay, well, I think, so to talk about the M1 for a moment, I read it, at least as much of it as I could. It seems fine, compiles on my machine. Charvel walked through it as well, seems fine. Zach is deferring to Charvel. I don't think Teddy has poked his head up. He's around, so that he hasn't poked his head up means he's clearly choosing not to review this. So I think that means I'll thumb it. I don't know if you also want to, Charvel, but there you go. It's formally approved now. So, yay.
Awesome.
Nice. I mean, for what it's worth, I reviewed it.
Do we... I'm just thinking about logistically. I would like to get it merged because it touches enough that I'm like, do we want to just turn off CI today, merge that, get on with it? How do we want to actually sequence that?
So we still have a couple of bits hanging around for the packaging. So the sooner we can merge this, the sooner we can start working on the remaining bits.
So the sequencing here, okay, I'm just taking notes here. So sequencing, turn off CI requirement on PRs, merge, fix CI, fix packaging. Right. And I mean, I could do, 1 and 2 pretty quickly. Alessandro probably can as well, but I don't know if you want me to do those two.
Yeah, sure. We only have to disable the jobs.
Yeah, I
The
will.
requirement of the 2 jobs, not everything.
I know.
So it's not as bad as it sounds.
I'll do appropriate things. I don't feel too worried about it. I just don't want to let it. I don't want to forget about it and leave it in kind of a weird state for too long. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm excited about that. Maybe I can do that after this meeting or tonight or something. And what was I saying? I was going to take a pass at this milestone. Sorry. Where did that milestone go? If I skim over this, the PIE support, it sounds like, do you want to actually do that?
Yep.
Okay. I don't think we're going to get the macOS Unified Logger in. It would be nice, but I don't think we're ready. I just doubt it's going to be ready in 2 days. So, yeah, other than that, I guess we'll just kind of see where everything lands. And cool. Anyone want to say anything else about 5.10? Excuse me, 5.2.0?
What about Teddy's peer about setting local time column to hidden?
Where did we leave that one? There were some changes that were going to happen on that. I will try and take another review pass on that. Apparently, on November 3rd, Teddy said it was ready for re-review. So I will try and re-review it. Charbel, I guess if you also want to, that'd be great. Because both of us had issues with the last version. Okay. Next agenda item, blueprint to change Windows UID, GID interpretation and performance.
Yeah. So how can I say this? Well, this all started due to a performance issue we have noticed when joining the users table against the groups table using the GAD column on Windows. And this performance problem exists because the GAD and UID columns are integers, and they are trying to represent something similar to a Unix UID GAD, but on Windows, Windows doesn't use in its APIs those values to identify either a user or a group, but it uses seeds, which are strings. And so, yeah, the first issue is that these joins are pretty heavy because the inner table that it's getting looked on is forced to return all the rows for each. So if you have a users join groups is forced for each user to return all the rows. Now the groups table does have group seed column. The users table does not. So instead of just splitting the difference, adding the group seed column on the users table, and since GAD and UAD as numeric values on Windows do not really make sense, what I'm proposing is to actually change the meaning of all the UAD and GAD columns of all tables we have on Windows, so that on Windows they are actually SIDs.
Where do the UIDs come from today? Like, you say they're not meaningful. Are they just made up, or is it some?
No, sort of. They are meaning. So they have a meaning, but they are losing information. So they are the relative identifier, the RID part of the SID, which is like the very last component of the SID, which is I think it's a 4-component string. Each 4-component string where every component is a number, and one of those numbers also identifies a domain. So we get that UID or GID from that very last portion, but that number is you can't use it in Windows API to do any to do any filtering or anything. You have to go first to SID through multiple APIs or using an account name, etc. So it's definitely not ideal, and it's not identifying a single user, basically. So the proposal again is to change columns actually to text, because those columns needs to be able to now have a string inside them. And then also, obviously, their values on Windows will not be anymore these UID and GID numbers, but actually SIDs. And these in general, so why the change? So why not just adding a group SID column? It's because so that we can write, first of all, cross-platform queries, so queries that work everywhere, and in general, because so that we can have existing query work and also use like the performant version of the query. One is not forced to change how it does queries to get the performant join or other kind of queries.
So the part of this that is most compelling to me is that UID isn't very meaningful on Windows, and the meaningful designator is the SID, because I mean, if it's not a meaningful value, then we should use the correct one for the platform. And the only reason for caution for me is that fundamentally changing a schema like this is potentially high impact.
So it isn't in the, so like again, it shouldn't be. I mean, beyond obviously what you would expect in that column on Windows, but it shouldn't be because on Windows, so again, all the queries that do joins or use other table columns to search into those columns will, if we correct all the tables that return a UID or a GID, should still work, because now they are all together changed from numeric, from a number to an SID. So there won't be cases where queries now are comparing a number with an SID.
Well, I'm not so worried about Osquery, because my recollection of SQLite is that in some ways everything's kind of a string under the hood. It's a little messy. I'm more worried about any sort of one ingesting data from us. So any vendors, anyone who's ingesting data, anything where they have an integer, an assumption of an integer-based value, they're suddenly going to get a string. So that is potentially a relatively large breaking change, even though I agree it's more correct for the platform.
Yeah, but I understand that, but I feel like just adding a separate column and so creating this difference between
I agree.
Like I'd like to be able to resolve what I think are mistakes. But yeah.
Stefano, did you say you think that if we make this change for folks who have queries that do joins across these values, that those joins would continue to behave as expected, even though the values themselves are changing?
Yeah, so maybe a caveat, obviously, I still haven't, so there might have been already some collision actually on values, because the relative identifier in theory is not enough to identify a single entity. So there might be a change in output, which means that that output is actually more correct now. But so the behavior, what I was mainly saying is that we are changing all the tables. So again, you are not in you do not find yourself in the case where you are comparing a number to a string. So yeah, unrelated types, let's say. There is a second caveat which I've added in a second post, always in the blueprint, which is the current behavior of the users table is that so again the users table shows the GAD for a user. Is that if it doesn't find a local group associated with that user, it will return the primary group ID, which is the only case that where the structure, a window structure, actually uses the RID, and through that way, that GID can be a domain group, so not a local group, but it's the only way that it can be returned. And another issue is if instead it's a built-in account like the system account, then we are taking the RID of the user SID as the GID, which, okay, so the change here I want to make is actually both of those cases should not return any result, because the tables currently are meant to and are working to return local users and local groups only. And to add to that, even right now that the GAD column is returning some values, those values are not joinable to anything we have anyway, because the groups table does not return those values. Like the groups table does not have any built-in or any domain group in there, or even less any system like that.
I feel like we've come up with a couple of other. We've had a couple of bug reports or questions about how the users table works on Windows with Active Directory users versus. There's definitely some confusion there, and I don't even know what we think correct is.
So, well, it is explained. So the difference I'm making is, yeah, I agree. It was pretty confusing for me too. So the meaning of local. So actually, the difference is local between local and remote. Local users are users that have been created on that machine. So on a domain controller, they could actually be domain users.
We've had performance complaints about people running Osquery and selecting star from users on domain controllers.
Which actually it's the source or source of the performance issue I was talking about. It's Osquery installed on a domain controller which has many users.
13,000 users is typical and too many for a table like this.
Yeah.
But it has to be more performant.
And
so I guess I got some questions, and I don't even know if it's worth poking into them. How much of this performance? So I was under the impression that some of the performance issues on the users table were actually just because the API calls were relatively expensive, and there's sort of an inner for loop there, right? Like we fetch, we get a list of users with minimal information, and then we like populate them with user detail level 4.
Yeah.
And for 14,000 things, that's just going to be expensive.
That was reduced. So you're talking about level 4 on that API call. I believe that was one of the things that was reduced to a lower level in
did we? Okay.
Previous PR. Yeah, I think if I recall, it was like a 60%.
I think you did that work.
Time improvement, but it still was not enough for something called 14,000 times. And so there's basically two initiatives. One is we have a few. Stefano has a few ideas on how to improve further the cost of one iteration of the table, but the real improvements are not doing the entire table when doing a join, especially not doing it multiple times. So that's where the real improvements are.
So the other question I was wondering, and I've seen this in some of the query writing we do here at Clyde, is that sometimes creating intermediary CTEs will help with alleviating that repeated join calls. Like sometimes you can get SQLite to fetch a table, cache it in RAM as a CTE, and then it won't keep hitting generate. but it all seems very, who knows what the query planner does? I feel like there's some other questions that we've never really. I feel like someday we should figure out how to indicate the cost on tables. Like SQLite has hooks for setting what the cost of generate is, which the planner takes into effect when it considers join ordering and filtering. And I believe we just hard code that. So sort of all tables use the same cost value. This is stuff that like Alex Malone was once nosing around a long time ago.
There's a cost on constraint, I think, in the expect index.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, where if it's an index or required, well, any constraint that we actually pass through to a table, they have cost 1. Otherwise, I think anything else has max cost. So yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, there are 2 values.
But I feel like there's really powerful future work in optimizing Osquery if we expose that kind of number to table authors, because we should be able to say this table's expensive, that one's cheap, and then let the query planner handle the join ordering and things. But I don't know, it's future work.
That definitely sounds interesting to me, but it sounds like, and I'd love to see like a blueprint or something on that if someone would have an opportunity to do that. I like the idea for sure. But back to what Stefano was saying, I think, Stefano, am I understanding correctly that sort of the question that you're posing to the group is like, can we make this somewhat breaking change to the tables schema when the way it breaks is potentially like minimally impactful and it breaks things by making it more correct? Is that like summarizing accurately?
Yeah, obviously, again, it's best. I think it's best described in the blueprint. There are those couple of caveats with domain users and domain, and but I think that has to be. I think we should first strengthen and stabilize the local group and users handling, and then from there we can go and improve the rest. There are also maybe additional improvements in the fact that we are not always showing all built-in. Like it may happen that the process tables shows you an SID that or a GAD that matches to built-in groups, which is not currently listed because it is not returned by the Windows API we are using. So the Windows API that lets you list and walk through groups do not list you built-in groups. So again, what happens is that another table shows you an SID that you don't know about, and since those are well known, we could collect a list of them and then hard code their information. But
So
I mean, this is additional stuff.
You mentioned the process table. What does the process table return on Windows? Would that also move to being SIDS?
Yes. Currently, it does have a UAD, if I recall right. And
so the one thing I kind of really do want to impress is that the thing you're proposing I think makes some sense to me, because I'm usually in favor of making things more correct. But I do want to impress that this is actually a breaking change for anyone who consumes Osquery data, because Osquery data is frequently consumed and fed into logging systems or databases, and you're changing the schema for that column. So Collide will have to update our data ingest pipeline. This is not a big deal to me. I know it's coming. I'll be like, okay, cool, we can just fix that. But it's, it has broad-reaching effects to anyone who's ingesting data. Okay, so glancing very quickly at Windows processes, what do we do here? Looks like Windows processes might just return -1. Is that right?
For Well, no, for the effective. So, yeah, there are many things to be fair, but it will be too long around how Windows is different from Unix, and we should probably have tools to separate that from Unix and avoid filling up columns with like default values and just not show those columns. But yeah, that's another matter.
So on.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so the process table just appears to have some of the time there's something that looks a little bit like a UID, and the rest of the time it's like negative ones. So I don't know what's going on with the Windows process table, but I kind of imagine that there's a bunch of tables where we are, as I talk about this, I get a little bit nervous because I feel like there's just a huge number of tables we have that almost certainly all are hard-coded to assume numeric IDs. The file table is going to have owner attributes. What's that set to? The process table is going to have stuff. Kind of like these UID columns are just so baked in and such a deep assumption that I'm actually starting to feel a little bit nervous trying to basically change the schema of every column that we maintain.
As far as I know, there is the process table, the logged in users table, the users table, the groups table, and the users groups table, which is the one that matches users and groups.
File table?
No, file does not show. Well, at least it does not show any UID as far as I recall. Check.
It's got UID. It's a big int. It may not populate the data for Windows, but it's there. It's in the schema.
Utility. Oh, okay. So file is another one. Yeah.
So I'm a little bit leery of this like extensive a change on schema definitions. I'm very torn between just sort of saying, well, this is going to impact a surprisingly large number of tables, which is a downside, versus correctness versus saying, well, we should create best practices for SID columns, and then on Windows you just have to know to join on those. So I don't know.
It's not just correctness. I think I would like to characterize this as enabling performance on this, because we can't do a join when there's non-unique results in the column or when they're not correct. So we are interested in this change in order to make certain tables performant and not broken and join.
Well, but you also pointed out that you could enable that performance by exposing the SID column and the group SID columns directly. But the downside is that then you have query differences between the major platforms.
So in order for a change like this not to be abrupt, maybe there's a way that we can hide one, allow it to exist, and favor the other somehow for some amount of time.
Zach?
Osquery 6? Like, I am totally down with the motivation for this, and I was initially leaning towards like, yeah, maybe we should just put this breaking change out there. But then as we dug in more and realized that it affects the files table, it affects the processes table, and all of these different tables, it makes me think Osquery, like someone should be able to step into Osquery today and get good performance and get correct data. And if vendors have to update their things because we improved something or we did something that was somewhat necessary to get that correctness and that performance, then I think that's okay. But I think to be fair to folks who aren't paying attention, like those of us, 7, 8 in this meeting right now, making a major version release could be a way to indicate that kind of thing. And I know we just caught one with Osquery 5 recently, but I don't really have a problem with doing that again. I imagine it's going to take this is going to be sometime in Q1 or Q2 2022 when we would get it out. So
I'd almost go the other way, which is to say, well, maybe the same way. I don't know. I think it's absolutely reasonable to just expose SID columns now. Like, there's no reason to wait on that. And then there's sort of a different, which gets the performance at the cost of needing to have platform-specific queries. And then I think there's a different question of, well, do we stop putting data in the UID column because it's wrong data? Or, and maybe a related question of, okay, what would it take to move to using SIDs across the entire table space? And I'm down for that, and I'm down for doing that as an Osquery 6 thing, and I don't know if I want to assume we would do it in Q1. I just think that might be a sprawling bit of work.
So there's definitely an incremental solution that though still causes some changes, which is, again, adding those user SID group SID columns. And so people will have to change queries, and so this is the change. Additionally, again, maybe this is minor, but I still think that there's a second problem which merits another blueprint, which was, that's something I dropped into core, which was so on Unix, UID is unique, is an index, but on Windows it is not, exactly because it's not identifying a single, and it's not usable as a constraint for filtering and returning one row only. So I don't think it is correct for us to mark that column as index and let maybe the user that knows what it means think that that column is optimized for filtering when it's not on Windows. So having a way to remove that index definition on Windows.
We can do this by putting the definition to the extended schema blobs, right?
No, we cannot. So the extended schema currently, I thought that it would completely remove the columns that are there if you are on another platform, but actually they still add the columns. They just make them hidden. So, and this is another issue I discovered, because if those columns are indexed or additional or required, they affect the definition of the primary key of the table. And that's not correct, because you are on another platform with another set of columns, which... Yeah.
So I'm not looking at any code right now. We have spec files. They list columns. And then there's like a place to extend columns on a per platform basis.
Yeah.
If we took the definition of the UID column out of the main columns and put it into a Linux and a Mac OS, and I guess a FreeBSD extension, and then Windows had its own definition.
You cannot.
Okay.
It will add all of them, and actually it will error before you can compile, because it is still adding all of them and just making them hidden.
That's intriguing.
Because the original, I dug up, so the original reason for the extended schema was just to hide some table from the select star, and that's it. So,
it's like the worst part of the WMI interface.
Yeah. And so, I did notice that it has... myself, I had a different understanding because I didn't look at how it was implemented originally, and I thought that it was removing them. So
amazing.
Even the PID with namespace currently column, which is additional, is affecting how the table primary key is defined. Which how we use currently tables in SQLite might not always affect anything specific, but still.
It does sound like that's the thing that we have to fix.
There are a bit of stuck issues, yeah. And yeah, and the second blueprint is also another layer of issues, but we can.
The second blueprint is this 7420.
Yeah, I think I still have to look into a thing that Seth correctly asked. Meaning, well, so there, the thing is, I've noticed that if you are trying to compare, so you have a constraint which has an empty string as a value, that constraint is never passed to the table logic. And for filtering, this is a problem because, well, if you have, now let's take again the domain controller case, you have a bunch of domain users there, and their primary group is domain users. Due to the previous blueprint change, and due to the fact that we only want to show local groups, you will then have a bunch of users with empty SIDs. And so you still have now an issue where you are joining, again, users with an empty SIDs against the groups table. And that causes, again, the groups table to return all the rows. And then SQLite filters those rows. But yeah, again, it's doing more work with the Windows APIs than necessary. So the proposition there was specifically for text columns. If a constraint comes that checks something and it's an empty string against a text column, we do pass the constraint along to the table implementation so that it can do filtering.
I think
Even because
totally...
empty string is a valid value.
Yeah, I mean, empty string is a legit value. We should absolutely not be filtering out of a constraint passing.
Yeah,
it seems obvious. I would also say I know that our Osquery is quite inconsistent in when it returns empty strings versus nulls. I think that's probably because our tables have been authored by many people over many years. But we're not so good at that.
So that's the second part about nulls that I have to check, because so my experience right now is that either if you set specifically a column as empty string and a text column as empty string, or if you do not set it, if you do not set it, it is still considered as empty string. So when the internals of SQLite calls the xFilter function, which is the step just before the generate of the table, when I'm checking the constraints, I am receiving an empty constraint there, empty string constraint, so it's fine. And also, I should add that for this specific reason, actually, what the table returns is not an issue, because it's a matter of the table handling the empty string constraint and knowing that with an empty string constraint, it either has to match it to some row or just return no rows. So there's no situation where you are actually matching this constraint to some saved value in a database, and you are changing the meaning of that. I don't know if I originally did not understood what you have said, Seth, but again, I think that specifically for that case, it doesn't matter, because
well, I guess so. If I think about it a little bit more, right?
It's generated on the fly. Yeah.
If I imagine calling a table, right, and I call the generate function, and I have find me every user whose description is empty string, right? That's an obvious constraint that I want to match, and if the table implements an index on description, then sure, we should absolutely pass that along and let the table do the right thing with it.
Yeah.
If you called SQLite and said, find me every user whose description is null, what should happen?
Yeah, that's a totally different, kind of totally different matter right now. So for the null, so for the text column case, in theory, but I have to double check. But what I see is that we don't have null. And anyway, again, it's the same thing, because so when you receive the constraint in the xFilter function, you will attempt to extract the value for that constraint, and the function we use will return null pointer instead of an empty string. Now you have to differentiate between, did this function actually return null, or it has had an out of memory issue.
Well, it's a little
But
bit
that's
weirder because in
Sorry.
SQL, nothing is supposed to match nulls. Nulls don't match nulls. So to some degree, like, I'm just not sure what should happen. It gets weird. Maybe I shouldn't have asked. Because if you say null does
Does it?
not equal null, it's false.
Wait. No,
Oh,
I'm not
sorry.
sure.
Null is false. The only thing that matches null is null.
Oh, is null. Okay,
That's
yeah.
it.
Okay.
Null equal
Sorry.
null, false.
No, okay, that's fine. So, yeah, I mean, even more reasons. So obviously, we would have to check. There are specific cases depending on the operation of the constraint, but you can return 0 rows in that case. Yeah.
I guess there's also these weird things where we don't pass a lot of constraints along. Like, I don't think we pass greater than or less than down to the generate functions. I think we only pass equals. We might pass equals and like.
No, we do. We do pass the gem. It's no, we do.
I don't have a test of this handy, but I swear I tried this and I didn't get them. But maybe I should revisit that.
I mean, no, it might be. I'll have to check, since I was in that code. My head was in that code recently, so I can check.
I guess I can try and reply on the blueprints, but I feel like on the empty string one, it doesn't sound controversial, right? Like, why wouldn't we just pass that along? Sounds like we should do that, of course. And then I feel like we don't have consensus on the SID ones. I think I'm somewhat biased against, because I think it's going to have very wide-reaching effects, and that feels very hard for me to grapple with quickly. But I'm reasonably in favor of adding whatever columns we need. I consider a command line flag that would like change the functionality if we wanted to start playing with that, but I'm also loath to make anyone do that extra work. So just thinking about like how do we phase in that work?
I don't think really table by table, maybe, but yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think preserving functionality during the deprecation phase, where people are given a lot of notice, and then it eventually drops maybe with the next major version, allows us to be more agile, but also not impact anybody. Because we don't want to put things off to a nebulous 6.0 date. Who knows if that'll be 2022 even.
I'm less worried about like the handful of vendors that are represented here, but I'm a little bit more worried about every site that runs
Osquery.
Well, I'm more worried about any site that runs Osquery and feeds data into Splunk, or pick a data lake. Like, are those data lakes going to get confused if a schema changes? I don't even know enough, but I know there's a lot of people out there that shove Osquery logs into some semi-structured data lakes.
So, yeah, and even better reason to have this
Correct.
the third blueprint, which is still not there, about having columns which are specific to the platform, is that we can avoid setting as text also the Unix columns. We can keep those as integer as anyone would expect, and make that change only for Windows, which means that in some specific cases, but only when you are actually confronting a specific value, then on Windows it might be slightly different how you do queries. But again, it would only happen when you are confronting for a specific value, checking for a specific value.
I'm just writing this one down. Yeah, I'm super torn. Like, for entities that ingest data, because we have been presenting this data as cross-platform and integer-driven, if we suddenly make Windows a string, is that going to be more or less confusing than making everything a string? I have no idea. And then we have these other times where like we present numbers as strings because they might get, bigger than 64 bits. So all you can do is make them strings. So I don't know. There's just all these big questions about it.
Well, time check. We're at about the hour mark. How many other discussion agenda points do we have?
0. Unless
Open
anyone wants
floor.
to bring anything up.
Okay.
I will attempt to get M1 merged today. If there are merge conflicts, I am going to bail. But I will go through the turn off CI, merge, turn on CI, or leave CI off or something. So I will try and do that fairly mechanical process. And I will try and review Teddy's PR and Stefano's blueprints. I'm not sure where the rest of you are, but as always, thank you for all the things you do.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks
Everyone.
all.
Bye.
Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Later, guys.
Yeah.